Finance Working Group of the Select Committee of the Chinese Communist Party to order. We thank our witnesses for joining us today, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Yeoman, Ms. Khan, thank you all so much. We will quickly get into a few opening remarks, and then we'll go to you for your opening remarks, and then we'll launch right into questions. I want to thank you all again for joining us today in our Select Committee efforts. This is one of those critically important efforts for the United States, and we have a lot to do and a short time to do it in. So in our first session, we examined issues regarding battery materials, rare earth elements, and permanent magnet plays in the United States. We talked a lot about the value chain. How do we make sure that we have the ability to source materials? It's not just about manufacturing and doing value added, but it's how do we make sure we have access to source materials? That's even more important today than I think it's been in recent history. Our power as a nation has always been in our ability to have a cradle-to-grave mindset as far as what we produce, and to somehow think today that we can be effective in advanced manufacturing without looking at having reliable source material is going to be, I think, critically important for us. Another thing, too, we talked about before was we can't do this by ourselves. We have to have partners around the world. We see what China's doing. China has become very adept at being what I call transactional coercionists. They go into these countries, they have these nice agreements after they have bestowed upon the countries, in China's words, not theirs, these projects, and all of a sudden the collateral for the projects are the natural resources of these countries. And you've seen them do it in Africa. You see them doing it today in South America. They are copying that same blueprint in South America, and it is never to the advantage of those countries. You look at those agreements, all of them are always to the advantage of China. What's happened is unfortunately we have not done an effective job in that space and looking at economic relationships with those countries that are mutually beneficial. I think we have a lot more to offer than China does, but China is very assertive in that space and makes great promises but doesn't deliver. And I think folks around the world are seeing China for what they are, and that is opportunity. So the question for us is, how do we make sure that we get China out of the single source business? Pretty astounding today when we see China owns 100% of the world's source of gallium. And you saw their policy directives that came out just the other day, the beginning of this week. This is not about them wanting to charge a higher price in the marketplace for these materials. This is about saying we are not going to sell these materials that we think in any way, shape, or form are critical to the national interests of China. So they're looking not just to make it economically difficult for us, they're looking to completely shut us out. And when we don't have any immediate source of those materials, we can build all the semiconductor plants in the world we want, but if we don't have access to things like gallium, germanium, graphite, we're going to be outside looking in. I talked to a company the other day that is starting to build a semiconductor plant, and simultaneously, you know what they're also applying for? Mining permits. And I suspect what's going to happen is they're going to find that they'll get lots of approval to build a building, to build semiconductors, but they will not get a mining permit. So that's where we have to join these two elements together. How do we make sure that we're able to source those materials? Listen, we want to protect the environment, but I would argue we will do a much better job in protecting the environment and protecting our workers than China ever will. China is the greatest human rights violator on the face of the earth. And Uyghur genocide and what they're doing to Uyghur women there is absolutely criminal. In any other situation, the world would be hollering at the top of their lungs because of China's bullying behavior in the marketplace. People are reticent to say anything about it. Now think about this. They do the same thing in Africa. They exploit workers in Africa. They destroy the environment in Africa because it's to their advantage. Now the question is we're not going to do that. We're not going to operate like China does. I would argue there's not a country on the face of the earth that is more environmentally responsible than the United States and does more to take care of its workers than the United States. So why wouldn't we want to self-determine when it comes to the source materials that we will need in order to compete in a world against the likes of China? Why wouldn't we want to set the example on what to do as a nation to protect human rights, to protect workers, to protect our environment? We have a great opportunity. and we should take advantage of that. So today's hearing is really about how do we take that next step, and I've gone on and on long enough, but as we know, value chain means something, and we want to make sure we understand how do we get there, and how do we get there at the speed of relevance, because timing today is everything. China, unfortunately, has gotten a 2-decade jump on us. We're going to have to run to catch up. So with that, I'd like to go to our ranking member, Kathy Castor, who's done an incredible job in the same subject matter area, has the same interests as I do, and that is making sure we get our country to the right place. So,
well,
Kathy?
Thank you, Rep. Wittman, and thank you very much for being here. We need your help. We need your expertise, your advice. My opening remarks were so similar to Rep. Wittman's that I'm not going to go on too long, but I hope you all know this is a bipartisan committee where we really are focused on bipartisan solutions that will be durable and can be implemented by agencies and bring the private sector in as our partners. You may have seen at the end of last year, the committee issued a bipartisan economic report, and part of that report was focusing in on critical minerals. And then we need your expertise because China uses its trade power, setting prices low, to alter the markets. They're not fair. And meanwhile, the United States of America, we're built upon fairness and collaboration with our allies and like-minded countries. So we want to reset in the world, and we want to build these collaborations and strengthen our domestic supply, and we need your help to do that. So I look forward to hearing from you.
Do you have copies of the testimony?
What's that?
Copies of the testimony?
Their testimony. We should. We have a copy of the witness's testimony.
We don't, sir.
Okay. We'll make sure we get that to you. And Kathy, thanks so much for bringing up how incredibly important it is to acknowledge that, the Chinese function at a different standard than we do. Listen, they unapologetically will lie, cheat, and steal to achieve their means. We will not. We are a nation built on principles and built upon, who we stand for as a nation. We're not going to abandon that, but we have to understand where our competition comes from and what their standards are, which are not ours. So I appreciate, Kathy, your leadership and for you pointing that out. I want to go to our witnesses now. I want to introduce our witnesses. We have Adam Johnson here, who's the managing partner at Metis Endeavor. He's worked with miners, processors, and OEMs to secure the U.S.'s critical mineral supply chains. Adam, thank you so much for joining us. We had Wade Yeoman here as an executive general manager of commercial enterprises at Jervois. He will tell us about how Jervois U.S. mine was shut down by predatory PRC behavior and ways to ensure that never happens again. Wade, thanks for joining us. We appreciate that. We also have Manaz Khan, who's the Vice President of Policy for Critical Supply Chains at the Silverado Policy Accelerator. Her experience in and out of government and deep trade insights will offer perspectives on diversifying U.S. import reliance on the PRC. So with that, I will go to our witnesses. Adam, we will begin with you, and then we'll go to Wade and Mahnaz.
Thank you for having me today. I don't often do this, so I'm gonna read.
That's fine. Please.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm grateful to be here today for this committee's time and attention on the matter of critical minerals and materials. You're all called daily to address the most significant challenges that this country must face. And our competition with China on critical minerals and materials is just such a challenge. First and foremost, it is imperative that the U.S. step forward as a leader in this space. For competitive industry to flourish, we cannot pretend that autocratic regimes are playing by the same rules. The absence of principled leadership and the rule of law opens the door for any nation with an agenda to take the helm. And China has a well-devised and ambitious agenda. Less than 2 weeks ago, the Chinese State Council announced that beginning in October of this year that their rare earth industry will formally be organized under central planning and that rare earth resources belong to the state. They'll be promoting expansive R&D efforts while enhancing oversight and coordination. Simultaneously, a subsidiary of the Chinese state-owned defense contractor, China North Industries Corp., otherwise known as Norinco, agreed to acquire a cobalt mine located in the Democratic Republic of the Congo so that its owner, African mining company ChemAf, could pay off debts to Trafigura amidst low cobalt prices. If this deal is finalized, it will be Marenco's third cobalt mine in the DRC. Once a mine is controlled by a state-owned Chinese company, it will never need to sell to pay off debts, and it will never relinquish control without intervention by the host government. These are just two examples of Chinese market interventions that have occurred within the past couple of weeks. Looking back at any given week in the past 30 years, it will reveal similar activities. We are witnessing a mass global industrialization by China. American industry can compete, but it must be properly equipped, and the goal must be aligned with leadership in order to win. We cannot expect private industry participants to enthusiastically charge into a contest where defeat is a foregone conclusion. Competing means upholding our democratic principles of free enterprise and rule of law while still being able to come out on top. It will require unwavering leadership that is committed for the long haul. As a nation, we have many unique strengths. We have robust global capital markets. We have deep ecosystems of entrepreneurs excited to disrupt incumbents. We have nations all over the world that want to work with us because they know we believe in and stand up for liberty. There are many attributes that we do need to improve, and I'm certain we will. However, in my view, the fastest and surest path to taking a leadership position is to harness our unique strengths around the highest level objective, which is undermining the influence of China's global critical mineral and material monopoly. The concept I advocate for, I call the United States Critical Mineral Reserve. In short, I'll refer to it as a reserve. It is not a subsidy, price floor, stockpile, or other mechanism by which the U.S. taxpayer becomes the ultimate customer. The reserve is a permanent organization within the U.S. government dedicated to undermining any anti-competitive behavior of foreign state actors within critical minerals and materials market globally. It can do this with a simple but powerful mechanism: lending capital to licensed privately held market-making entities, providing patient means to purchase reserve-designated minerals and materials from reserve-designated jurisdictions at specific moments in time. Monopolies use targeted timing and control over price to defeat competition. When competition is low, monopolies increase price to gain outsized profits. When others begin to enter the market in hopes of capturing those same profits, monopolies wait until the new entrants make their investments, and then they lower prices to a point where those investments are wiped out. They then sweep in with cash earned from their previous outsized profits to buy those distressed assets at a discount, just like Marenco is doing in the DRC. This cycle repeats over and over until no competition bothers to enter the market or until the monopoly is defeated. Through the reserve, we can scuttle this cycle. Buying at cost or above from friends and allies at times when prices are low will protect those producers from being wiped out. Because prices are low at those moments in time, the licensed market makers should be able to find buyers to pay during the term of the loan, generating a profit and enabling them to repay the reserve. It's a simple mechanism, but it enables producers to survive while letting normal market functions of price discovery, matching of buyers and sellers, and equity risk develop. The reserve concept has many additional attributes. Continued continuity of operations will improve efficiency, offtake certainty will encourage private capital, and establishing market functions in the U.S. will provide greater value to allies and prospective allies as an opportunity for offtake. Prices will gain transparency, access to detailed and real-time market data will increase, and existing capital providing programs such as XM, DFC, LPO, DPA, which have committed significant capital already, will gain certainty that their investments will find Western commercial markets rather than further distress. The reserve is a true industry solution that benefits the markets and not a single company. We can beat China without becoming China. Market makers will need to raise their own equity capital. They'll be required to maintain minimum physical inventories on the ground in the United States. which can augment the federal stockpile without the need for physical management by DoD. This approach will improve supply chain traceability and an important but broad implication, the reserve will ensure that these markets, as they develop, are transacted in US dollars and not Chinese yuan. The challenge we face requires bold vision. It's the nature of the competition we are in. We must take action to mobilize Western industry behind US leadership. China is way ahead of us. For decades, they have been stockpiling through their State Reserve Bureau with the goal of controlling this sector. Half measures at this point in the contest will not work. Delaying will only increase the cost of catching up later. We face a significant challenge, but the United States thrives on challenges. In competition with authoritarian regimes, we have always found success, and we can do it again. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. I appreciate your viewpoint. Some very good, I believe, assertions about what the United States needs to do. I like that you've provided some potential solutions. So, Mr. Yeoman, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Reverend. Thank you all for the opportunity to speak here today. My name is Yeoman. I'm the Executive General Manager of Commercial for Jervois Global. Jervois is an Australian company with focused on establishing an ethical, responsible, Western-focused supply chain for cobalt products that are essential to the energy transition. Our business includes the Idaho cobalt operations in Salmon, Idaho. It's the largest cobalt mineral resource in the U.S. Jervois has spent to date over $150 million on mine construction and concentrator production prior to suspending operations in March of 23 due to the cobalt price collapse. We also have an operating cobalt refining business in Jervois, Finland, where we operate downstream special product business as part of the Western world's largest cobalt industrial complex there. And we estimate that we currently supply around 10% of U.S. cobalt demand from that facility. We also are planning a future U.S. cobalt refinery where we'll replicate the Jervois, Finland model in America. We're currently completing a bankable feasibility study that's funded by an award under Title III of Defense Production Act. And this facility could be commissioned as early as 2027. And will allow Jervois to seamlessly bring our decades of experience in Finland producing advanced cobalt products to the U.S. Demand is growing for cobalt due to the energy transition. Current global demand is around 190,000 tons a year and is forecast to increase to as much as 390,000 tons by the end of the decade in 2030. This is more than double today's consumption. With the growing EV demand, defense modernization, geopolitical tensions, we'd expect a growing cobalt industry in the U.S. Hasn't yet developed. Why not? Well, the reason is that Chinese companies now dominate that market. These firms have expanded capacities above current demand in both mining and refining operations. They then sell cobalt metal and chemicals at pricing that's not based on a level playing field with U.S. or other Western market costs. They're provided with low or no-cost financing. They do not need to cover actual production costs or make profits on their cobalt products. Rather, their priority is to ensure low-cost inputs for their battery industry and their military. On the mining side, Chinese firms now control the majority of operations in both the DRC and Indonesia, the two largest cobalt-producing countries. On the refining side, Chinese dominance is just as significant, where Chinese firms have more than 90% of the refining capacity for cobalt chemicals essential to the energy transition. The only cobalt refining complex of any scale for those chemicals outside of China is our shared complex in Cobalt, Finland. After the end of the Cold War, U.S. public policy scarcely considered critical minerals. While this indifference has increasingly given way to alarm, the legacy of decades of inaction is profound. In 1990, the U.S. had a cobalt stockpile that was over 24,000 tons of material. It's now effectively non-existent. Over the last few years, however, the Chinese government has been adding to its strategic reserves through purchases of an estimated 20,000 tons of cobalt metal. China has a track record of restricting access to critical minerals, and its strategies of market dominance and manipulation are now widely known. Unless the U.S. acts aggressively to secure its cobalt and other critical mineral supply chains, China will retain its ability to severely injure America's defense and industrial sectors anytime it wishes. So, what would a U.S. strategy look like? In our view, it should be built around a vertically integrated cobalt supply chain with a functional U.S. mine and a world-class refinery. This would give the U.S. a significant insurance policy in this critical commodity. Jervois believes where private industry can access capital or ought to do so. This underpinned our decision to raise $100 million in debt to build the Idaho cobalt operations. Unfortunately, as the mine neared completion in March of 23, the cobalt price was plummeting due to the Chinese oversupply. Jervois was forced to suspend that commissioning as it would lose money on every pound of cobalt we produced. To date, we have not done a deep shutdown of the mine. We're still maintaining at our own costs all the infrastructure that would allow us to restart the mine in a matter of weeks. But it's very expensive to keep that up, and the holding costs are mounting, and Jervois may be forced into a deep shutdown. Once that happens, it would take years to return the mine to commercial production. We note with interest the committee's proposal for resilient resource reserve. In our view, the easiest way and least costly way to ensure the viability of U.S. projects in these commodity areas is to establish a voluntary mechanism that would see a floor and ceiling price established. Support at low prices and a payback feature at high prices would ensure that taxpayers would not be supporting permanent one-way transfer to companies and firms, and that the firms are still able to benefit from the upside of rising prices. America has it within its power to reduce its dependence on China for critical minerals and to shield itself from the worst effects of the Chinese price manipulations. Let's hope that the U.S. government is ready and really prepared to do what it takes to win this competition.
Thank you.
Thanks. Please take questions.
Thank you, Wade. Appreciate it. We'll now go to Ms. Khan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Wittman, I think you laid out all the issues beautifully, and I have pages and pages laying out the issues. But I want to dig into the solutions and how Silverado looks at these issues for critical minerals. And our approach is a little bit different than other think tanks. We are made up of former trade policy professionals that worked at Department of Commerce, ITC, and USTR. I worked at all three agencies. So we're looking at the implementation piece and how we can write that into legislation. One of the recent actions that USTR proposed was a Section 301 tariff, and that's going into effect on cobalt and manganese on, I think, August 1st, 2024. And graphite will be going into effect January 1st, 2026. What we see is there's a big threat there, because even though we're having a stick, which is a Section 301, what's going to happen is China's going to go into, especially African countries and other countries, and control the midstream processing. So we need to act fast. And we can do that. We have windows of opportunity in this Congress to do that, whether through the AGOA reauthorization, whether through the BUILD Act, increasing DFC financing, whether potentially through USMCA. And we see this already happening in Chinese investment in the EV battery supply chain in Mexico. So they're just going to replicate that in Africa and other countries. So just our approach at Silverado for dealing with critical minerals is we use data, right? Start with the data. What we're looking at is our net import reliance of each single critical mineral. Then we're looking at what industries, what critical minerals do we produce in the United States. We see rare earths here, we see lithium here, we want to protect those industries here. And then we're looking at what can we not source here, what can we source abroad, and looking at the FEDOC investment abroad in those countries. For example, in Indonesia, there's a lot of Chinese investment there, so we just want to be careful before we enter into any agreements there. So start with the data. The next thing that Silverado does is incorporate the business insights, like our gentleman here. And we do this through a series of roundtables. We hold diplomatic roundtables where we have U.S. government, businesses, and also the diplomatic community. So we have everybody talking. We just had one yesterday on Africa. We had one a week and a half ago on India. So we have everybody talking, trying to figure out how to move the needle on these issues. We've also hosted international partners and U.S. partners on critical minerals at the Munich Security Conference. That was the first time this year that critical minerals was on the agenda at MSC. And also we've hosted multiple CEOs in the mining industry and critical minerals industry at our summit, our recent summit. And then what we do is we focus on implementation and how we do this through various agencies. There's a lot of duplication we see in the critical mineral space. This is in the public domain, but it's by Cassidy and Levi. You see all the agencies doing critical minerals work. This is not efficient. So we're looking at how to make this part more efficient. We can do that through legislation. So just want to set the stage there, how we're looking at this. We are advocating at Silverado for a holistic critical mineral strategy. The good news is there is some legislation that's already been passed that you can hook on a holistic critical mineral strategy, and that's in the Consolidation and Appropriations Act of late 2020. And I would direct you to section 7001 and 7003 of that act, where they direct to have a critical mineral strategy, because that's already out there. We also support the critical minerals security bill, the act that you guys have, that's out there as well. But I think that there's already legislation that you can hook on this because we have to move very quickly. And what we're doing at Silverado, there's 50 critical minerals, and there's 2 different lists, right? So that's a bit problematic. We're operating on 2 different lists. At Silverado, we have grouped these into about 20 to 25 critical minerals, right? We have 3 different groups. And different industries, have prioritized different critical minerals. But how we group them is we're really looking at our net import reliance on China for a lot of these critical minerals, right? If it's coming from a foreign entity of concern, we took them out and we group them, especially if it's Russia and China. So we have three different groupings. And all of these are problem children, but we took out the 20 worst problem children from this. Our first, and I just want to caveat, these groupings, sometimes they're used in multiple applications, but this is just for policy purposes and legislation that we have these groupings. The first grouping is EV critical minerals, right? Those are the ones that are used in EV batteries. That would be manganese, graphite, lithium, cobalt, and nickel. So those are the 5. This is a consumer-driven market, so we need consumer-driven policy recommendations for this market. And I just want to caveat that we're 100% net import reliant on graphite and manganese. So those are allies and partners that we really need to go after. We just did a roundtable and proposed recommendations on India, which produces both of these, and to increase collaboration with our ally there. So really targeting both of these because China can make this from us anytime. The next category is called what we call strategic defense critical minerals, and it has 4 criteria, right? So it's critical minerals that are used primarily in military, defense, and industrial applications that we do not produce in the United States, where the United States has 75% net import reliance on, and where a major importer is a foreign entity of concern. So we've grouped these out. Examples of these are antimony, barite, fluorspar, gallium, germanium, rare earths, and tantalum. And just to note, germanium is we're only 50% net import reliant on, but we put it in because of the nexus to semiconductors. So it's very important. And the last one is green tech critical minerals, which are used in wind energy, nuclear, and geothermal systems. Some examples of these are zirconium, copper, tungsten, titanium, niobium, and indium. So I just want to leave it there. We have a lot of recommendations on some of the bills that you guys have out, but that's just our approach, and so I just want to give you the overall framework of how Silverado is looking at this.
Well, Ms. Khan, thank you. Some great policy objectives that we need to be looking at. I agree with you. There are actually some existing statutory authorities or directives that we have given that just need to be utilized in a much faster pace than what they're being utilized today. Mr. Yeoman, I appreciate your perspective on the anti-competitive practices of China. We know that when their government subsidizes their industry, they have no problem with overproducing and dumping on the world supply to make sure that they set aside their competitors, and that makes it impossible for companies like Jervois to do the job that they need to do, and we appreciate what you're doing here. One of the things that we have to look at is how do we utilize the capability and the capacity of our partners around the world, and I think that's the most unrealized resource. As you talk about Australia has great mining technologies. There's some limitations there on the refining capabilities. One of the things, too, that doesn't get mentioned today is that it's not just, what do we do to source materials on mineral deposits here in the United States, but the largest source of critical minerals on Earth is the deep seabed. And China is cleaning our clock in making claims on the deep seabed, as well as Russia in the Arctic. And we got to get in the game there too. And there's great opportunities to have partnerships with lots of Pacific nations that could work with us and work with Australia. I mean, this has to be a partnership. And you notice that other countries, Japan, North Korea, the Philippines, even Vietnam, are keenly interested in working with the United States in building this production capability to counter China. Now, what China's going to do is as soon as they see something like this that comes up, they're going to try to squash it. The only way that we can help survive that is for these countries to know that they will have the backing of the United States. And I think all of you have brought up a very critical component, and that is, how do we leverage capital in private equity markets, and for that matter, even in technologies in the venture capital market, to be able to operationalize this quickly. Government policy has to follow this. Mr. Johnson, you bring up the idea of a reserve. I think that's a great concept, more of not a physical reserve, but really how do we have a unified policy and how we do that. Mr. Yeoman, you talked too about making sure we had a vertically integrated supply chain. The value chain, as we call it, has to go from cradle to grave. So you just can't say we're going to, we're going to build a battery plant here, or we're going to build a semiconductor plant. It has to be no. Where's the source material come from? Before you even talk about building a production plant here, you better make sure that you've got production locked down. So the question is how do we put in place policies that provide the directives, and whether it's the U.S. government being a guaranteed customer, as you point out, Ms. Khan, in the defense space, how do we make sure, too, that we have a tax code that actually encourages investments in those areas to really draw capital to those places? That helps us level the playing field with China. So I think all of you all have had very, very thoughtful proposals. My question in trying to tie all of those together is, how do you see the fastest way for the United States government to pave the way for private enterprise to be able to really, move at the pace of relevance in building the capacity that we need on the beginning of the value chain? Mr. Johnson? Yeah.
From a mining standpoint?
Yeah.
I think that...
Well, I would say both from an extraction and a refining standpoint. So let's look at both parts of it.
I think ultimately the supply chains are, without integration, going to be impossible to sort of piecemeal. And we've seen that, and we can talk rare earths, right? So we have MP materials, which is going to be producing significant amounts of separated oxides in Southern California, like the most rigid standards in the world. And we've got Lynas, who was previously in Australia, and they've been funded to do processing in the U.S. The problem is that neither of them have customers for that separated oxide in the U.S. And that's what people don't talk about, is actually we have too much rare earth in the U.S. These are interesting misconceptions. All of MP material is being sent to China currently. So we've seen this exact cycle of boom and bust, where Molycorp was very successful in 2011. Prices went up. It went bankrupt because the prices crashed. And then the current ownership of MP Materials took it over. And basically the prices started to move, and it was very successful. And now they're in a situation where the prices are down again. And the only customer of last resort is China, because there is no midstream. There's no metal making, there's no magnet making, and even the magnet making that we're talking about producing, which I've been a part of two of the deals in the United States on this topic. As China puts in 20,000, 30,000 tons a year, we're talking 1,000 tons. So we're not gaining on that 95% market share in any meaningful way. And so it really is limiting when you don't have the downstream integration. And that's what's really required. I do think that, the concept that I was talking about, when we think of government as a backstop or an ultimate customer, I don't think that works, because you're ultimately taking the materials and minerals out of the market. And what it needs to do is get into the market. Like the downstream customers, whether it's automotives today or robotics tomorrow, which I think is also difficult to navigate who the ultimate customers are. A lot of the analyst reports are benchmarked to auto because it's easy to benchmark to auto. It's difficult to benchmark to robotics and industrial automation and drones and aerospace technologies that don't exist today. But we're going to need this material for all of that. behind the innovations for that. And so really it's about like jump-starting, like a doctor jump-starts a heart. We have to jump-start the industry and get it going and get the blood flowing.
Best way to jumpstart the industry, is it tax code? Is it investment credits? How do we do that?
You want private capital to start coming in. And that was why I was suggesting you have a market maker come in, because the U.S. is great at making markets. That's one of the skill sets we have. And, if, they had, a large, when you talk about midstream, let's explain. So like you can't start a processing company from scratch because, the question is where you're going to get feedstock and who's going to buy it. And no private capital is going to say, here's several $100 million for your inventory. They're not going to do that to guarantee an offtake. And that puts any midstream business at a disadvantage right away. And so if there was, a market maker that could come in and say, we'll guarantee the purchase once you get up and running, while prices are low, especially, because if prices are high, there's a bunch of business cases. When prices are low, that's when the business case is difficult. But ironically, that's actually probably for a market maker the best time to come in and buy. But they need patient capital that's willing to be on the line for that risk. And that's where there is none, because these markets are opaque. This is why you see differences between publicly traded with like copper. They're a little bit more like fluid, but that's because the big companies, BHP, Glencore, they're happy to play in copper. What they don't want to play in is gallium, because it's super small, it's not hedgeable, and it's not traceable, and usually it's a byproduct waste stream. So actually, there's a bunch of gallium in waste stream byproducts of a bunch of mining companies all over the Western world. But nobody can make a business case out of it because they're not interested in, getting involved in like an esoteric market, a small market where, you can't hedge.
Mr. Yeoman, I think that leads right into what Jervois has dealt with. So
I think our experience is unique in that we've actually been developing a mine for the critical minerals to the point of almost being ready to start when the cobalt price collapsed. And you were asked, how can we rapidly make that happen? It's really about the level playing field and having, as Mr. Johnson said, having a marketplace for which those products can be sold profitably. And the concept of a floor and ceiling price mechanism that the government will support U.S. critical mineral miners when prices are low, and then have that support paid back when prices exceed a ceiling price is one way that could be done. So other things that could be done, we've seen some significant improvement in potential demand for U.S. produced materials from the EV industry with the EV tax credit from the IRA, and especially the FEOC designation rule in that legislation. The difficulty for the cobalt market is that while the EV market is quite large for cobalt, all the rest of the batteries that come into the United States don't have those requirements. So your cell phone, your laptop have cobalt batteries as well without those same restrictions. And so while we can squeeze them out of one, they just come in another way. And that's, so we're looking for the government support in leveling the playing field, whether that's the kinds of capital that is being talked about at low interest rates and let us compete with our Chinese competitors who get their capital for basically free, or whether it's the pricing support or the tax credits. The IRA is a good example of that being very positive.
Ms. Khan?
Sure. Just two suggestions. This is an idea that we've been toying around with at Silverado, is doing a matching program. I think there needs to be understanding from the government that critical mineral sector is inherently risky, and so there needs to be more government capital. So, for example, for domestic projects, maybe the government can have a 2-for-1 matching program for $2 government dollars for every $1 of private capital that will kickstart a lot of these investments or allow these.
Would that be in the form of a grant or a loan in the match?
That's up to you guys. Whatever passes, but only for like a 3-year period or for a 2-year period, right? And it gets graduated down, maybe it's $1 for dollar after that. But something that will get the attention of the private sector to really invest capital in this. And then we also are toying around with the idea of doing the same on the DFC side. So if the DFC reauthorization was, was reauthorized, doing a 2-for-1 in countries, maybe we can have a specific list of critical minerals where we're 100% net import reliant on to infuse that capital in those developing countries, because we just see China coming right in. The other thing, and this is one of our suggestions for our India roundtable, is doing feasibility studies, the USTDA, or other organizations in developing countries. And what that does is take the risk out of, the businesses don't have to put up that cost. The U.S. government is doing that for minerals that we need abroad. So those are 2 suggestions.
Thank you. Kathy?
So continuing on this, Ms. Khan said one easy way to think about it is EVs, defense, and then green tech. So that adds kind of this level of complexity if you're trying to create these kind of reserves and supply-demand mechanisms. How would you deal with that?
I think the concept would be to limit complexity and to understand that we can't foresee what's going to be important in 100 years. But I think critical minerals will be important in 100 years. If we believe in autonomy, we believe in drones and robotics and traveling to Mars or whatever we're doing, critical minerals are going to be important. I don't know necessarily what form that takes.
Is it that EVs, that's the most mature and maturing market right now, so you start there?
Yeah, I think EVs have gotten a lot of attention because it is the next up-and-coming thing. But as I mentioned before, for the cobalt industry, we're involved in all those other sectors as well, whether it's other batteries, where it's more cobalt is used than even in the EVs, or whether it's in green tech, or whether even in military applications for aerospace alloys. Cobalt's a critical mineral in all of those. So it gets very complicated if you try to sort of say what type of cobalt goes in this bucket and what type of cobalt goes in that bucket. And I think it's more important that we focus on the minerals themselves and the overall global supply-demand balance, and make sure that the U.S. supply chain has their share of that covered, whatever that portion is, whether it's 10% or 80% of that. The U.S. needs to have that mine-to-market supply chain covered.
So there are a lot of federal agencies now that have a piece of that, the chart that you had. Those are.
It's barely readable.
You can see. So these are U.S. federal agencies. Okay. So how is the collaboration going among the agencies right now?
So for Silverado, what we see is having lead agencies for EV critical minerals, because it's consumer driven. Maybe that's Department of Commerce, maybe that's DOE. Having certain lead agencies with their supply chain task force dedicated to certain critical minerals. For strategic defense, we really see DHS and DOD taking the lead on that, and green tech could be DOE and EPA. I do want to go to your point about the reserves. So at Silverado, we're really looking at the reserves for the strategic defense critical minerals and using the NDAA as a hook, because that's already in there, and doing it that way. What we've heard at these diplomatic roundtables, when we talk to OEMs, is that the composition of the EV battery is changing so quickly.
Right.
So to stockpile those kind of materials doesn't make sense, because in a year or two, you might not need it. So you have all this sitting, with the government buying certain critical minerals that we potentially could not need. But the strategic defense ones are the ones we're 75% or more net import reliant on, so that would make more sense. That's how we're looking at it. Okay.
Good. Thanks, Kathy. Right?
Thank you. As I've listened to your discussions, it takes a lot of money to be able to do what they do. We're talking about money we need to invest here to be able to compete with them. Where do they get their money to be able to do their mining, to be able to do their refining? Because in our committee's work, we see that a lot of the money is coming from us. Investments in their companies, investments that go to the government /CCP, which go to where they want to go with it. So my thought process is, while I don't disagree with trying to incentivize our folks here to get invested in it, to build our own plants, to do our own mining, I think we need a two-pronged approach where we also invest here. We also go after the investment of money over there, stop that flow, so it makes it more difficult for them to do their job and compete against our companies. So we're not subsidizing them to be able to compete against us. Is that a rational premise?
I think it is a rational premise, and I think the FEOC component of the IRA has done that to a great extent for the EV sector. But as I mentioned before, that's one sector, and it's only a portion of each of these critical minerals that go into, I mean, we're talking about batteries as the biggest demand consumer for cobalt, but half of the batteries are in our pockets and in our laptops. And the FEOC component, the FEOC IRA component doesn't apply to those units. So we need to make sure that something like the FEOC can prevent those kind of investments to make the overcapacity that these guys are willing to go ahead and just do not have any value, because they would have no market for the finished
Well, I mean,
product.
that's something I think we, as a legislative body, can do, is to find a way to minimize that investment over there, or stop the investment, add these companies to a list of companies that you can't invest in.
I mean, I think it's important to define the FEOC very clearly. The FEOC definition in the IRA is a little bit vague when it comes to Chinese-owned companies.
That may be a good place to start.
Chinese-owned companies outside of China are acting as if they're not an FEOC in the EV supply chain, or at least they're making noise that that's the case.
And under FEOC too, they are much more nefarious today in layering separation from their parent company to all these shadow companies.
So a clear definition of FEOC, and also an FEOC type issue across the board for critical minerals, not just a tax credit in the EV space, would go a long way towards doing what you're asking for.
Well, and then one way we can compete also is you're talking about China going in and buying these different cobalt mines and other rare earth mineral mines around the world. Why don't we have a program that allows a company, through loans or tax credits or whatever, incentivize them to go buy that as a national security issue, that we can incentivize that happen? Is that possible?
I think that would be a very valuable program. I think there are a lot of U.S. companies that would love to be invested in critical mineral mines, but the risk position is too great for them to do that. And with government support, it would change that balance of leveling the playing field.
May not even have to advance the money, just go and guarantee the loan. If you do that, all the government may be on the hook for the risk, but they won't be on the hook for the money if the thing works. So therefore, there's an opportunity for somebody like SB loans and Exim Bank loans and World Bank loans, things like that. If you just have guarantees out there, there's a way to make that work, I think. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but it looks to me like you could do multiple approaches here to be able to control what they do, as well as enhance our ability to be in these markets. And you make the point, Ms. Khan, with regards to the haste with which you need to do this. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? How much time do we have before we're behind the eight ball and lose this effort forever?
I think we're already behind the eight ball.
Well, okay, the second part of my comment, when we lose this, the whole thing forever.
But we can speed up.
We're behind, we can get behind it again, what you're telling me.
Yes.
Okay.
I think one thing when you're asking how the Chinese make their money and how they're able to do all this, when you're using forced labor, right? You're not a non-market actor. That's a big problem. And I think the CCP noted that there is forced labor from the Uyghurs in the lithium production. Yeah. And we see that. So one solution is to use the UFLPA for lithium. We are 25% net import reliant on that. We have an industry here. So that's something that we can do to counteract that and trace that lithium all the way back. And have companies do that so that they're forced to supply here or elsewhere outside of China. So I think that's one way we can stop the flow of Chinese investment, at least for the EV sector.
One other comment, I'll be quiet here. Whenever you have government guarantee things, you can also shift that risk. You can de-risk that off to the private sector. There's a lot of insurance companies out there waiting to de-risk a lot of the things that the government guarantees. And then suddenly you de-risk that to the private sector and the government while they're involved from a standpoint of helping make the secure the loan, not guarantee it. They shift the risk off to the private sector, and so there's no risk to the taxpayer any longer. So I think there's ways to structure this, I think, would be great incentives for different entities to get involved, perhaps buy these things, build smelters, if not here in this country, other places in the world that are friendly to us. I'll stop there.
Yeah, that's great. Richard?
So it sounds like, obviously everyone agrees that critical minerals are indispensable and that a government role is inevitable, although there's a debate as to what that role should be. If I understood your proposal correctly, that you would borrow at low prices from the government and then pay the government back at high prices? Is that?
We would look at it as borrowing. It would be up to the amount that you'd been previously subsidized.
And so how would that differ from your proposal? And then a separate question, I think you mentioned a role for the government in combating anti-competitive behavior globally. So I'm curious to know, what does that mean concretely? If we know that China's on the verge of deepening its grip on cobalt mining in Congo, what exactly can we do to prevent that?
Yeah, so one way they would differ from what was described by Wayne is, so subsidies are going to be mainly for the U.S. mines. So I think that would be a limiting factor. So it would be, I don't think the U.S. government is probably going to be able to subsidize all of our allies. So you become, an island, right? So that's where those types of programs break down for me. Additionally, they're subsidies, so the taxpayer is paying with no expectation of getting paid back. There's a potential to get paid back, but no expectation. I think that there's also limited equity risk, and there's no market being made. So there's no, guarantee of clear path to some sort of private capital flowing in, except on the CapEx, which, sort of speaking to the capital required to build out refineries, whether in the U.S. or globally, or buying them, I don't think that's the problem. There's, many programs, ESC, XM, LPO, DPA, that can provide cost share or low-cost loans to commit CapEx, as well as private capital. The challenge is, can you create a sustainable market that's not going to be abused by anti-competitive behavior? Can you create a resilient market? And the way that this would work, internationally for I'll punt on the question about the Congo, but I'll use Chile as an example, where we have a free trade agreement. They produce lithium, they're starting cobalt, they have copper, starting rare earths. They are actually sending all of that to China, almost all of that to China. They would love to work with us. They're like, who's gonna help us? If we set up processing, in the U.S. or in Chile, if there was a market maker to say, we'll buy that from you when times are tough, and then it's on us, our equity is at risk, it's on us to go and sell that. We have to find the customers. The government's just guaranteeing the time it takes us to find those customers, right? A year or 2 or 3 years or whatever it takes, which is really the problem. It's a time problem. It's a time shifting problem. It takes X numbers of years to make a mine. It takes this many years to make a smelter. It takes this many years for demand to catch up. And it's all a timing problem. And then companies go out of business because they get caught in that trough of the timing. And so if you have a patient buyer that can say, I'll go buy this from you today, and I can hold it for 3 years because the government's backing me, but I will find a buyer because eventually that loan comes due. And then my equity is at risk. And the government can swoop in and say, we'll take the materials that you bought and we'll put your license up, and new equity needs to come in. And you did a bad job. We're bringing in more new private capital. Then there's, I think, endless private capital that would step up if the government would act in that way to sort of.
How does that differ from a subsidy?
So there's a loan that has a defined term. So say it's 3 years at treasury rates or whatever the rates are. And they say it's for the opportunity to go buy cobalt from Five Eyes nations or from free trade nations processed in the US. It could, like, the contract can be defined however, but there's a loan, and if it's not paid back in 3 years, we're calling it unless you show us that there's a clear reason why it needs to be extended. And if we call it because you're buying at bad prices or we think something's weird is going on, we're going to take your equity because you're going to have equity in your company to get the loan. And then we're going to put the license up for auction, and we're going to bring in new equity, and someone else is going to manage this company going forward and take this opportunity to go out as a trader on behalf.
And do you have thoughts on who in the government should play that role?
I think it needs to be, in my view, I don't think that it would be best housed under DOE, like any of these, partly because I know all of them and they don't like working together and they have different priorities. And it's complicated, as we've seen, to like, if there was one entity that actually took the data from all of the agencies and said, this is our aggregate US need and like demand and problem. You know, DOD needs gallium, DOE doesn't. They need cobalt and manganese, and they do the aggregate, and then they say, okay, well, cobalt prices are not sustainable. Market maker, go out and buy cobalt over the next 9 months. We're giving you this amount of loan to do that. Pay back in these time periods. It has to have this CO2 emission. It has to be from these jurisdictions. Whatever. Go do it. Now it's on the private entity to figure out how to do that, and they're going to have to know the market really well.
You have a preference as to which agency would play that role, the aggregate role?
This is where my experience falls short. I'm not a legislator. I'm not even a public policy guy. But my view is you would want it independent.
Because I know Ms. Khan, you spoke about lead agencies, so I'm curious, what about the notion of one entity that takes a bird's eye view of all our critical mineral needs?
I mean, it'd be great to reorganize that chart with the lead agency and have
We have to at least
one.
condense that down to a dozen.
Well, just like CISA is the point on cybersecurity across the federal government, should we have an equivalent with respect to critical minerals?
I think for the financing piece, yes, we've done financing critical mineral roundtables. We have DOE sitting in the room, we have XM, we have DFC, we have all of them. We have different entities of DOE sitting around in the room, right? Nobody knows where to go. And that's the big problem. And everybody's like, hey, we're here, we have money, but the people like Adam and Wade, they don't know where to go. I mean, it's a big maze, as you can
I
see.
think one critical part of this whole thing, though, is that if you have a buyer, whether it's the government or not, it still has to be at a price that makes the underlying business profitable. And with the Chinese oversupply today and lower prices in these critical minerals, you still need something to fill that gap.
Well, and there's no overarching strategy about what's the objective of our country with this, and whether it's in the EV market, whether it's DOD, whether it's in base manufacturing capacity. There's no strategy, and then with no strategy, you can't execute because everybody has different authorities, and they're like, well, we could do this, but we're not sure how to do it or why we would do it. So it's that fragmented, and that's what you end up with, and paralysis. Nobody's want to do anything because there's no overarching strategy. So the question is I think you have to start with a strategy and then say, okay, then who is responsible for that? It may not be creating another entity. It may be designating one of these and then consolidating all the other ones into that. But anyway, I'm sorry, Richie, I didn't. Yeah.
You can have a financing entity that's sitting up top with interagencies there.
Yeah.
So if there's a company that comes, right, and because when we have these diplomatic roundtables, billions of dollars on the table.
Yeah.
So if you have like an interagency, maybe 10 agencies, like we have a company that needs money, who's willing to front the money that would.
Can I add one more question?
Yeah, please.
And then I've got a,
No, please.
so if I understand your proposal correctly, right, the government would provide a loan so that there's enough time for market making. But your point is that does not solve the problem of China overcapacity, right?
Right.
Because
And so I guess how do we solve that problem?
Well, I think it goes back to the discussion about finding a way to keep the Chinese supply out of our supply chains. They can oversupply all they want, but if they don't have a market here, then the market here has to be filled by companies like Jervois. And, we've got a mine ready to go, turn it on and have U.S. produced cobalt coming out of the ground in weeks, if there was a cobalt price that would allow us to do that.
And it can't just be U.S. buying cobalt. It has to be, how do we have that midstream manufacturer that's going to turn that cobalt into a product that can be sold? Because you can't just stockpile cobalt and think somewhere
And
somebody's
the
going to
U.S.
buy it.
consumers are eager to buy from U.S.
Yes,
producers.
yeah.
However, they also tell me when I'm talking to them about long-term supply arrangements, but your price is so much higher than the Chinese.
Yeah.
And so we have the desire, but not the possibilities yet.
Carlos?
Where's the largest battery production plant in the United States? Who has it?
I want to say North Carolina, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, today they're all under construction, more than operating.
Where are they going to get the raw materials?
They're working joint ventures with their current existing suppliers to build plants in the U.S. for sort of the component materials, but the raw materials still come from the existing places that they're coming from today, which is for cobalt, it's DRC, Indonesia, through China to Korea, Japan.
I mean, the finished processed product, where's it coming from? I mean, you have to process all these minerals before they go to the battery and the whole thing. So where does the processed product come from?
So the battery supply chain, which I'm most familiar with, has got about 8 steps from mining to concentrating to refining to what's called pecan production, then can production, and cell production. And those are all being done in China and also in other Asian countries like Korea, Japan.
So I knew the answer. I was just wanting you to say it.
But
Okay.
most of the OEMs that are building EV complexes in the U.S. are planning to build some of those components, if not all of those components in the U.S. They're just not there yet.
Refining them also, the raw products, the raw materials?
No, that's what we're operating now to establish for cobalt, a cobalt refinery that would get the.
Do you think that do you think that China's got 90% of this corner right now, right?
Yes.
The mines, the production, the refining facilities, all that, subsidized by their government, right? So, maybe I'm a little pessimistic, but I think they've won this game, to be honest with you, okay? And so, if I feel that they've already won the game, I'll change the game. So, it just seems funny to me that somehow China corners the market on the ability to produce the things that somehow we are marching headlong into and feeding their market. And that's EVs. And even from an environmental perspective, the same raw materials for one EV can go into 10 hybrids, and 10 hybrids will give you a much greater environmental impact than one EV. So even from an environmental perspective, it doesn't even make sense what we're doing. So I think we need to identify those things that are critical to us, the amount that's critical to us from a securities perspective, and then guarantee that from you all. Because I'm not sure that you're going to be able to produce, if we go 100% EV, I don't think you're going to produce the product. We're still going to have to get it from China, which again for me is feeding the beast, and that's something I don't want to do. So I'm a little bit different than most people here. I'm a little bit more radical, okay? And when I don't think I can win a game, I'll just change the game, okay? And so we're playing their game, and I don't understand why we're playing their game. Instead, so maybe some of the policies here, maybe we need to change the game, all right? I'd rather see it, I've already said this before, I'd rather see us looking into how can we invest more in fuel cell technology or other things that will make that product that they're so good at us less reliable on it, okay? And be just as environmentally friendly. Right? I mean, for every pound of carbon dioxide that we reduce here in the United States, they increase it by 2. Because all this green energy things that they're building over there, it's all on the backs of coal. It is. They build a new coal-fired plant, electricity plant every single week. And so for everything we're doing here, they're doubling the output of carbon dioxide for every pound that we save here. So what are we doing? I mean, planet-wise, what are we doing? So, anyway, those are my comments. I do believe that we need to take more aggressive steps to secure the minerals that we need for our security. We have to identify what that is, and then we have to play a little bit of their game, which is, okay, we need to subsidize this because it's in our best interest. Critical minerals is one, shipbuilding, there's a whole bunch of stuff that we need to do that with, that we've been adverse to. We always say the private sector will take care of it, but so far, their private sector, really not private sector, their government over there is really undermining everything. They're pretty strategic. All right, let's kill their shipbuilding. Okay, now let's kill this, let's kill this, let's kill this. Before you know it, we have nothing here that we can produce.
I
Want to comment on it? Great.
Yeah.
I think that's a really important observation, right? I mean, there is, like, if everything's benchmarked to EVs, right, you need to think about the holistic view of what all these minerals go into. And I think that, for what we're talking about, like, it can be targeted at the more opaque, difficult markets for defense or what have you. But building those supply chains and those markets still needs to occur, and that's really the key. And that's going to be a moving target, because what's the interesting and important, like, technology today is going to be different in 10 years and different. And coming up with that mechanism, I think, is going to be core to how the United States can compete over the next 100 years. I mean, because we're going to need these materials more and more in different ways. We don't always know, but I think we need to have that mechanism. And I think that is a really, important insight.
I think to Adam's conversation, we should be taking a long-term view. I don't think we've lost this game. I think we're behind, but I think we're behind.
You're behind in the fourth quarter in the basketball game by 50 points, okay? So
But
right now,
if the game were ending soon, I would agree with you. But unfortunately, this is a longer, 100-year kind of discussion rather than a 2-year discussion.
I do want to say that I was listening to a podcast on Winston Churchill, and it can always get worse.
That's right.
I have one point on that. I think, I don't think that we've lost yet, and one way to do that is with critical mineral agreements with our partners. We haven't been doing enough of those to make them eligible. At Silverado, we've developed a friend-shoring litmus test for critical minerals that uses both Congress, USTR, and the U.S. International Trade Commission, and we're looking at certain factors for this litmus test. First, we're trying to figure out what we can mine and process at home, and then the availability of substitutes within the United States. Also, what's in our partner country, what we need, what we can't source here, and then an analysis of the FEOC concern investment in that partner country. And what the ITC can do, put all these factors in. They're great modelers. I used to work there. Stick it into a model. You see if there's significant harm to the U.S. industry if you're going to enter into a critical minerals agreement with that partner. And then that goes to both Congress and USTR. Then USTR, the interagency, certifies the ESG standards. And you can do a critical minerals agreement, or what we call a Tier 2 agreement, which is something like possibly Congo or some other country, where you're like, hey, you don't meet the full benefits of a critical minerals agreement because of your labor concerns, but we'll help you get there. We'll meet you where you are, and we'll help you get there. So that's one. And then once we do those sectoral agreements, then you raise tariffs on China and make it hurt.
No, I think involving international partners, those that should be our friends, where we have unfortunately abandoned that space, and we've abandoned the space in Africa, and for that matter, even in a lot of areas in South America. Who's trying to occupy that space now? China. Another opportunity, too, is what do we do with already established partners? Australia, India. Listen, and we have mechanisms already in place. The Quad is a mechanism that's already in place. It's only a matter of putting the economic meat on the bones on that. We already have Pillar 2 in AUKUS. You can go tomorrow and use Pillar 2 for what needs to happen there. If you associated that with the U.S.'s effort to make claims on deep seabed minerals, to again be able to now at least have some control over sourcing. You may not have to go and harvest that for years, but at least be able to assert that claim to keep China out of that space. I think that those things are incredibly important, but it still goes back to, what is our national strategy? What's our national strategy? And Ms. Khan, you talked about data on net reliance on other countries. I think what we have to do is to be able to chart, what's the demand going to be in this country? What are we going to do in building that midstream production capacity here? So it's not just the extraction and refining, but it's, how much of that are we going to manufacture here? How do we make sure we have that base manufacturing component here? Design our strategy around that and said our bottom line is going to be we're going to produce or purchase from friends a certain amount each year of these critical minerals, rare earth. If you do that, then all of a sudden you can have a strategy to go, okay, how many places do we need to go to get that? And these other countries want to participate with us. I mean, if you look at Japan, North Korea, Philippines, Vietnam, even the Association of Free States in the Pacific look at it and go, they're looking at us going, you guys need to get your act together because we would like to be with you rather than China. But, as you said, we have multiple levels and everybody's saying, well, you do something, no, you do something, no, you do something, instead of having a unified strategy on what we do. And then you can actually get to execution. You're not going to execute anything when you have all these dispersed areas of responsibility because someone says, well, it's not our job. We have a tool, and here's the tool, but we're not required to use it. Anybody who wants the tool,
They have
you can
distinct
use it.
missions, and your point was the financing, an overarching financing strategy.
And I hate to sound like a broken record,
Yeah.
but it
Yeah.
still, in the end, comes down to the cost of those components. And you have existing U.S. manufacturers who have a choice to buy local, high-priced material, cheap Chinese-priced material. They're still choosing to buy the Chinese.
I do want to say, from
Yeah.
a cost standpoint, when you start an industry, it's always more expensive.
Yeah.
We have to pay to train, we have to pay to engineer the equipment because there's no suppliers for this stuff. We have to pay for reagents, we have to pay boom, everything that China has, like readily available for supply and know-how and everything else. It's cheap because they've got economies of scale.
Yeah.
If we need to get started to find out what we can do. I think we can compete with them on cost longer term, actually. But we need to get started, right? We need to get the industry up and going and make it actually have liquidity. If it doesn't get to liquidity, then it's never going to achieve competitive.
Okay, suppose that you were able to do that, all right? Do you feel that there would be enough raw material for you to process? Because it looks like China's got that corner.
I think that if we could get markets going, sort of defibrillator style, get them pumped up and get them moving, get the molecules moving through the machines and wires on the other side, absolutely. And I think there's a lot of countries all over the world that want to work with us. All I hear is, we would like to work with you, but we need to know how we can. How do we work with you instead of them? Because the investors aren't stepping up. The OEMs aren't stepping up. Because of that cost issue, the cost is going to look like this. It's going to go up and then down over time.
But the Chinese could strangle you another way, knowing that you're now looking over there. They'll say, okay, what are you going to pay for that raw material? We'll pay you more for that raw material. They could strangle you that way.
If they do that, that would be great. I mean, Jervois will probably tell you if China's going to pay more, that would be great. If we're going to pay more, but and that would actually be good for the
You're
U.S.
trying to starve you with your raw material that you need.
Yeah, but you have to think about it holistically.
Okay.
Because there is actually an abundance of raw material. We're at the beginning of consumption. It's the same as like oil. There's an abundance of it. We're at we're 150 years into using it, but
Okay.
we need to also think about it like longer term. That's when mineral management, recycling, broad partnerships come in. But like my former company, MP Materials, it's great that they're producing rare earths in the United States because there's the opportunity for somebody to come and do the midstream because that's bookended now. But if Jervois can't even get up and running, that's a problem, right? And we need to get them up and running and developing efficiencies and improving their operations so that they can start to solve pieces of this puzzle.
Yeah, but to
Remember,
answer-
they don't play fair.
But to answer your
Oh, I
question,
know.
they couldn't take the resources if they're U.S. resources in the ground owned by the U.S. company like
US,
Jervois that's taking
I know
it.
that, yeah, okay. US is fine, I
Yeah.
understand that, but then non-US, can they outbid us for those raw materials? And how much of the raw materials that we need are actually in the United States? I don't know. You know, I'm not a mineral guy, I'm not a rare earth guy. There are some places that we do know they're right now off limits that we need to, that's a national security concern that we need to put back on limits, okay, so that we can actually start and having our own supply here domestically in the United States.
Agreed.
Richie, any additional questions or comments?
I'm just, maybe, if there were a conflict between the United States and China would have, as retaliation, just shut off access to all these critical mineral supply chains, like, would that completely cripple our capacity for self-defense? Like what is the depth of our dependency?
I think it would hurt us in a near-term issue. Like, so you would be okay for a short term because we have stuff, and then it would get worse. But just knowing how the history of conflict has worked with the U.S., at that point we would probably be willing to spend a lot of money to get these mines up and running. And I think we would be able to do that because we do have the know-how, we do have the capability, we do have allies with resources, and we do have resources ourselves. But it shouldn't have to get to that point, right? That's the issue. Is we need to avoid getting to the point where everyone's mobilized and, you know, all of Congress agrees to vote yes because we're at war, right? That's what we want to avoid.
I think I would answer by saying that all of the resources that we have would shift to the defense complex, and then you'd have nothing left for the EV industry or the other, you know, that's how we would handle a short-term conflict situation where there's a limited amount of those materials available to us. So it wouldn't be a good situation. We probably could shift units over if need be, but there's a lot of complexity to the physical forms and the quality of the different materials that are required for superalloy application, for instance, versus a battery application. So it would be.
You want to hear something wild? We could probably recall everybody that has an EV. We want your EV so we can get the stuff out of the EV.
Right.
So yeah, there would be some mechanism like that you could get what you needed, but it would be painful and it would be quite a bad situation to be in.
And it would definitely impede our economy for a significant period of time.
We'd all have to send our cell phones to the smelters.
It would be a Rosie the Riveter moment like we had in World War II. So, yeah.
Although in that context, the semiconductor industry would have collapsed, so the cell phone question, I guess.
Like, or the world would be like if people had to turn in their cell phones for rare earth to be used for national security purposes. That would be an interesting.
And I'm not a policy expert, but I do think that having a balance of power, like, you know, we're thinking this is a Cold War of critical minerals, having a balance actually probably increases the odds that you avoid a real war like that.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's the most important part
Yeah.
of this entire discussion, is that we're dependent now, and our EV industry, the entire critical auto industry of the U.S. economy is now shifting to that, and it's going to, you know, if we end up dependent, it's a.
That's why I think it's insane.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
That's why we are shoving ourselves right into their laps, okay? And that's where I think it's insane. So I'm sorry.
But I think we have time to catch up. We just need these incentives to work out, and we can have those supply chains in the U.S.
Can we do it by 2027? Because that's Xi Jinping's, time to invade Taiwan. So can we do it by then?
Well, I think too, if it, not only within that time frame, but also, I don't think anybody realizes the impact of taking Taiwan. I think some people look at it, you know, rather myopically and say, "Oh, it's no big deal, just an island out there next to China." But then when they look at, you know, the semiconductor marketplace, and all of a sudden, you know, China now controls 98% of the world's semiconductor production when they take Taiwan, I can tell you, people are going to be very surprised about what the impact it has on the United States and others, especially since our supply chains, you know, we can build all the semiconductor plants we want. You know, the most recent company that's now raising capital to build a semiconductor plant is also pursuing a mining and refining permit at the same time. Now, I got news for them. they're not going to get a mining permit or a refining permit anytime in the next decade, so they're going to have to find sources elsewhere. So the challenge is going to be, how do they operate? But they're seeing that they're going to, the way that they see themselves existing is to make sure that they address the value chain from the original source to midstream to endstream. And I think smart businesses would have to look at that today and say, listen, we're not going to be reliant on others. We're going to have to make sure we source material, we produce the midstream products we need, and then the value-added products.
You mentioned World War II. I mean, they were able to convert Ford plants to planes, to produce planes in less than in 12 months.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of this, and this is why I'm so grateful to be here with you all, is it's a question of will.
Yeah.
Like, they had the will 30 years ago, and they decided we're going to take the lead on this.
Yeah.
And it really is a question of will. We can do anything. We're very capable.
Well, and here's where the physical limitations exist today. If you look at World War II, Germany increased their manufacturing capacity by a factor of 15. Japan increased their manufacturing production by a factor of 25. United States increased our manufacturing production by a factor of 100. The question is, could we do that at that level of magnitude today? And my answer would be no. I mean, so, it's great to have the Ford plants there that converted over, but you have that existing manufacturing capacity here because we were there at the height of the Industrial Revolution. Today we think that we can niche produce in advanced manufacturing areas, and a lot of the other capabilities just not there.
The benefit of having this conversation is we're not there yet.
I agree. No, I agree.
And I think the outcome of this conversation is recognizing that we need to get there.
Yeah.
And so we need to start doing that now so that we can be, if what you think could happen in 27 is even a remote possibility, we should be doing this today so that we're in a situation where those requirements are covered.
Don't take what I'm saying that we lost the race. What I'm saying is that we need to get you up and running.
Yeah.
Right? We don't need to keep shoving ourselves in their lap. All right?
Yep.
This headlong race into electric vehicles, which just takes up a huge amount of our minerals. All right? And so there are better ways, even for the environment, all right, than going this electric vehicle route. I have nothing against electric vehicles, I really don't. But they dominate that. Right? And so that's why I say we need to change this game somehow, so that we're not feeding them. That we got to keep our own stuff. We need to get you up and running, just like shipbuilding and everything else. In World War II, we could build 6 aircraft carriers for every one the Japanese could build. The large ships, there was like 232 orders for these huge, cargo ships, right? 233 maybe. 232 of them were built in China, and one of them was built in the United States. That says something. And so, he's right. We can't switch it on like that. Yeah. We have to build it, and it's 30 years of neglect, probably more than that. Okay. And our mistaken belief that somehow by bringing them into the world and all that somehow they're going to find freedom and everything. And that was probably one of the biggest wonders of the 20th century. Heck, I probably bought into it myself, okay? So, we're paying for that mistake. That's all.
Well, the good news, the glass is still half full. We're still the best innovators and creators on the face of the earth. And we're also the best problem solvers on the face of the earth. And when you talked about Winston Churchill, I'll close with this. Richie, have anything else?
I might disagree with some of the statements that you made. But
Okay, well,
other than that, I have nothing. Although I do feel like we should think about not only our manufacturing capacity, but the net capacity the U.S. and its allies.
yeah.
I feel like that's
No, I agree. I think
not
international
going to be able to do everything domestically.
Yeah, international partnerships are going to be the key going forward. I mean, we see the emphasis that China's placing with Russia, North Korea, Iran, and others. I mean, we got to get in that space. And the good news is we have people begging us to get in that space.
Well, and to that point, Jervois specifically, our operating assets in Finland, which is a world-class cobalt refinery and cobalt production facility, we're bringing that technology to the U.S. when we build the U.S. refinery here. So it's definitely a international cooperation led by our Finland team and the technology that's already in place there. So that's a very big part of it.
Yeah, no, I agree. Listen, Rich had great points, and listen, everybody's got different ideas about where we need to go, the pathways there, but I think we all understand that the end point is going to be the same, and that is we need to have this capacity no matter how we use those components, whether it's for EVs or hybrids or national defense. We still have to have that capacity. So I think that's where we all agree. I want to close with this. Anything else, Carlos? Let me close with this. I want to go to your point about a book you're reading from Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill, as you know, worked very hard to convince Franklin Delano Roosevelt to help Great Britain from the scourge of Nazism. And he went to Roosevelt and said, "You got to help us." And Roosevelt said, "You know what? That dastardly Congress, they tied my hands." Congress adopted a resolution of neutrality, said we are not going to get involved in the European conflict, regardless. So Churchill went back to Roosevelt and said, "You've got to find something, go to your lawyers and find something that you can do to help us out." So he went back to his lawyers and he called Churchill back and he said, "Our lawyers have come up with something." It said, "We can take some B-25 aircraft and we can take them to the Canadian border and we can push them across. We can't use mechanical means, but we can push them across and you can come over and pick them up." Of course, Churchill sarcastically said, "Gee, Franklin, thanks. Thanks a lot." But we know December 7th, 1941 changed the United States' mind. And the day after, Winston Churchill said this. He said, "The United States is the greatest nation the world's ever known and it always does the right thing." After it's exhausted every other possibility. So we're at that point, Carlos, of making sure that we don't exhaust every other possibility, that we actually get a little ahead of ourselves. So I think everybody's in agreement with that, and I appreciate you all's perspective. Thank you too for coming to us not only to define the scope and breadth of the problem, but also to offer some suggestions about how we go in the right direction to change policy. How do we get things going at the speed of relevance, which I think is key for us, and make sure that there's some leadership in the right places, in the right ways, at the right pace. So I deeply appreciate what you all do. We will continue the conversations with you and ask for your continued guidance and thoughts as we continue to come up with information that we will pass on to committees of jurisdiction. Our job is kind of as the clearinghouse to go through the select committee, which has no legislating powers, and make sure we get this to the committees of jurisdiction. So that's the helpful part of this. So again, I thank you all so much. Richie, anything else?
That's it.
Carlos, anything else?
Keep exhausting every option.
We're doing it. Folks, thanks again.